Hi everyone. In this set of videos, we're going to look at Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is all about displaying variables. So we're going to look at the displays that are appropriate for qualitative variables and then the displays that are appropriate for quantitative variables. When we look at quantitative variables, we also like to talk about the shape of the distribution. So we're going to start with qualitative variables, but I want to use this data set. So this is a snippet of a data set because I believe that this data set has 1,200 and some individuals in it. And this is taken from this website, and it's on all of the vehicles that were made in 2018. So you can see we have a number of variables here. We've got the division and the car line. We have whether or not the vehicle is a hybrid. We have the number of cylinders, the fuel economy for city and highway, and then the combined fuel economy, the transmission type, the number of gears, the annual fuel cost, the fuel economy rating, and then the tailpipe carbon dioxide emissions level. So I'm going to use some of these variables because you can see that we have a mixture of quantitative and qualitative variables here. So we're going to use some of these to look at the different displays. So we're going to start with the qualitative variables, and I want you to notice that I still have categorical here. So change this to qualitative here. So there are three main ways to display qualitative variables. We can look at tables, and here I have a frequency table. I'll also show you a relative frequency table. But the graphs are typically bar graphs or pie charts. So we're going to start with the tables. And so I've got a frequency table here that also shows a relative frequency. And in statistics, when we talk about relative frequency, we're talking about a proportion or a percent. When we talk about frequency, we're talking about a count. So if I look at the table and I'm just looking at the frequency, then I'm given the counts. And this variable is the transmission type. And recall that that is qualitative. We had 1,273 individuals, so that's given right here. And of those vehicles, 948 are automatic and 325 are manual. So if I just looked at that part of the table, I would have a frequency table. But if instead I looked at the percentage, we would call it a relative frequency table. So if I take each one of these counts and divide it by the total, I'll get the proportion. So I can see from the relative frequency table that about 74.5% of the vehicles were automatic and 25.5% of the vehicles were manual. A pie chart is a great way to show relative frequency. We can't show counts in a pie chart, but we can show percentages. And a pie chart is very visually appealing. We can see right away that there are many more vehicles that are automatic than manual. And each slice of the pie needs to be proportional to the whole in relation to that relative frequency. And you can see that it's reported over here on the side. 74.5% of vehicles are automatic and 25.5% are manual. We could also display this information in a bar graph. So similar to our tables, we can either have a frequency bar graph or a relative frequency bar graph. A frequency bar graph is going to show counts, and a relative frequency bar graph is going to show percentages or proportions. So we would have these counts here. I forget the exact counts, but this was 900 and some. I think this was 325, and this was 9 something. Let me go back. 948. Right, so those are the counts for each of those bars. whereas the proportions, this was 74.5% and this is 25.5%. The frequency bar graph and the relative frequency bar graph look very similar here. Never mind, they don't look similar. They look exactly the same. But when we look at it when we're comparing groups, it can look different. So we have other ways to do more complicated bar graphs. We have side-by-side, or what are called split bar graphs, and we have stacked bar graphs. So I know this page is a lot to look at first, but what I did was I grouped them by automatic and manual, and then looked at the fuel economy rating. And in this case, even though these are values, I looked at this as a qualitative variable, since they were whole numbers this way. And so I split this up, and when you look at the frequency table, meaning I'm looking at the counts, you can see that there are many more vehicles that are automatic than manual. And so even if we're looking at the fuel economy rating of 5, which is this purple one, is so much higher in the frequency bar graph. But look what happens when we look at it as a relative frequency bar graph. So now I'm changing these to percents of their group's whole. So now we can see in this manual that these look different now, right? The number of vehicles that are rated, the percent of vehicles that are rated 5 for manual transmissions is relatively much higher than the percent of vehicles that are rated as 5 for the automatic, even though by count, this is a lot higher than this. So when you're looking at bar graphs, it's really important, especially when you're comparing groups, to look at whether or not you're looking at counts or percentages. The stacked bar graphs almost have to look at percentages. And so this works a little bit more like a pie chart, in that each proportion of this bar has to correlate with a proportion for each group. I find the stacked bar graphs a little bit harder to look at and compare.